One is, what does the GMAT actually test? What's key to wasting the GMAT in terms of just the overall philosophy of it? We then translate into some questions with regards to how should you approach the GMAT, and from that foundational knowledge, we move towards building your personalized study plan, and then from that point on, once we know how you're going to get started, we move towards the core skills that you need to build to ace the GMAT. So we go on to very very specific skills, and then we end the session with, okay, how do you create a prep strategy that's trackable, that takes you towards your target GMAT score. That before we get started, I just want to let you know we also have some other free webinars your way. We have a free webinar on algebra. That's tomorrow. In this, we talk about inequalities and absolute value. If you have not registered for that webinar, make sure you register for that. It's exactly a day from now. And then there's another webinar that I host. It's next Saturday. It's on critical reasoning, in which we talk about pre-thinking and how you can use that to tackle some of the most challenging problems that you're likely to face on the test. So both of these webinars are really knowledgeable. They're designed for high scorers, and they're designed to impart you skills that the GMAT frequently tests. So if you've not registered for them, definitely do that. I'm going to hide them. I'm going to have them available later on if you guys want to attend those webinars. Okay, but that I want to kind of get to know you guys a bit better. So we already have when you want to take the test. Then I want to actually ask a few other questions. What's your target GMAT score is one of the questions that I want to ask. Let's get this piece over here, and then I also want to figure out what your current GMAT score is. So both these polls are one below the other. Let's get those in place. For those of you who don't know their current score, I'd recommend that if you need a starting point, take a Sigma X mock. This is something that will give you a starting point. So again, you can click on this link and bookmark it for later. It'll give you your starting abilities, and you'll know the value of those starting abilities. But with regards to the target GMAT score, you can see that about 80% of the class or so is in that 730 or higher bracket, with up close to 45%, or the biggest group over here aiming for a 99 percentile or higher score. We have about 18% in the 710, 720 mark. And then with regards to the current ability levels, the biggest group is in the 560 to 600, although the 4 to 500 is also almost a similarly sized group as well. Okay, right, let's just hide this. I also want to ask this one other question, which is around the GMAT focus. Which exam do you prefer? I know you don't have the option to take the GMAT focus, but you guys know enough about it. So which exam do you prefer? And then I want to put in a chat pod over here where I want to understand why is it that you prefer one over the other. So you can put your reasons in the chat pod, whereas if you don't know anything about the GMAT focus, you can also state that over there. But then which exam do you prefer? And then that's the stuff on the left, and then why is where you put stuff in chat. You've been preparing for the current GMAT, all right? No idea about the GMAT Focus edition, all right? No info about GMAT Focus, more resources available, okay? All right, abundance of resources. You've been preparing. So most of you have been preparing for quite some time. Any percentiles on what would be a good score for which one? I mean, the scoring is very similar on both. It's just what that score is composed of is different for GMAT Focus versus the current GMAT. Okay. If you want to know more about GMAT Focus, then essentially we wrote an article. If you actually Google it, it's one of the first articles that appears. You can click on this GMAT Focus edition. Essentially, what the GMAT Focus does is it does three major things. One is it brings the IR section into the forefront. It has a new data insights section, which accounts for 1/3 of your score out of 800, or 805 is what the new scoring scale is. That's number one. The second thing is, on the verbal side, there is no sentence correction in GMAT Focus, so it's purely critical reasoning and reading comprehension. The third thing is that every section, so the exam's shorter, so you have 3 45-minute sections. So the exam's about almost an hour shorter. So yeah. So those are three sections, three major things. There are a few major minor things as well, which you can find out. All right, with that, let's go right into the webinar pane. And as you go into the webinar pane, what you can really see is the screen which says, how do you score 95th percentile or better on the GMAT? And below this, what you have is a Q&A pod. Now, this area of the screen is what kind of belongs to me, in terms of, I talk to the presentation. If you have questions, you put them, and I respond to those questions in the Q&A pod. There's also this space on the right hand side, um, which is something that uh, 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 which is where you put your responses. So let me clear all answers. This is a short answer pod over here. This is where I ask my questions and you put your responses over here. Okay. Now, what are my goals with this webinar? As I said, the agenda is, we'll talk about the fundamentals of the GMAT, then we'll go on and you leverage those fundamentals to build your GMAT study plan, and then we'll help you craft a strategy for predictable success building upon that study plan. Okay. Um, so let's kind of just start with the webinar right away. So one of the core things when we talk about the fundamentals of the GMAT, and this is where we're starting from, and the question says, what do you want to learn from this webinar? You guys can actually add this. This will be a good point um, as well. So we'll start with the fundamentals of the GMAT and then move forward. Okay. So now, when it comes to the GMAT, I think a lot of people talk about some very, very sophisticated things with regards to the GMAT. And the GMAT's a beautifully designed exam, and it's very elegantly designed. What it means is that it's very precise with regards to assessing your abilities. The second thing is, the design of the exam is because of its elegance, is fairly simple. And this is something that you'll see with a lot of things in the world. Things that really do well are really simple to understand, and they're, because they're simple, they actually can be scaled, so you can apply them in many areas. A fairly recent thing is, your large language models, which are built on deep learning neural networks. And if you look at the fundamental architecture of those models, they essentially, fundamental architecture is fairly simple, where you have a weighted average summation model built with an activation function. For those of you who know how those networks work. But the GMAT's fairly simple. If you understand a few things about the GMAT, you'd be able to figure out how to prepare for it, and in fact, you'd be able to plan your preparation for it. And this section lays that foundation. And one of the most important things that I want you to take away from this aspect is that when it comes to acing the GMAT, it's about building strategy. A lot of people, when they prepare for the GMAT, they focus on these other things at the bottom, where they start worrying about timing. They really just say, hey, which questions to attempt? How will I get better in one kind of question or the other? Yes, those things are important. But then, when you execute your plans for the GMAT, they have to be done in a certain sequence. And if you get that sequence wrong, a lot of that energy gets wasted. So stuff such as timing, exam strategy is important, but you want to make sure you address those things at appropriate stages. But overall, when it comes to acing the GMAT, 80% of your success is governed by building ability. 20% of your success is governed by all of these things together. Now, the interesting thing is, if you do this 80% right, you almost have a very, very high probability that you'll also fix that 20%, just because doing this 80% right gives you the core skills to build that 20% or so. Or in other words, if you build the right ability, just with practice you can fix timing. But if you don't build the right ability, you can practice all you want, your timing won't be fixed. Okay. So with that, actually, let me hide this. I'm sorry, I was supposed to put the Q&A pod here, not the host question. I was like, something seemed funky over here. Okay. Now, what is ability? An ability on the GMAT is a very logical construct. It's a very numerical construct. It's something that's very measurable on the GMAT. And to put that measure to it, I want to give two terms over here. One is, what's accuracy, because accuracy is a term that we understand that. And accuracy, very simply, is essentially you take a 10-question quiz, you get 8 out of those 10 questions right. You say, my accuracy is 80%. So in other words, accuracy is what we call as an absolute measure. When you say your accuracy is 80%, you essentially are not really saying how you did well compared to others. And for example, if those 10-question quiz were composed of easy questions only, then an 80% accuracy will get to 50th percentile ability. That's all it can predict. But if that quiz were composed of hard questions, then that 80% accuracy will get you to 99th percentile ability if you do the math. In fact, slightly better than 99th percentile. And so accuracy is an absolute measure. It has no comparative aspect to it. Ability, on the other hand, is a comparative measure. It tells you how good you've done when it comes to other test takers. So when you really say you want to get a 760, what you're really saying is, hey, I want to be at the 99th percentile or amongst the top 1 percentile of test takers. If you say you want to get to a 700, you're saying I want to be among the top 12% of test takers out there. And your GMAT score is an ability score, and it's composed of multiple ability scores that we'll see overall. Okay. So how does the GMAT work? How does it actually compute that ability? And to do that, let's kind of understand an adaptive test algorithm, because most of you know that the GMAT's an adaptive test. So this is one of the simplest form of adaptive algorithms that exists out there. So to do this, we're going to compare, question attempts for 2 students on the first 5 questions or so. Now, on the y-axis, what we have is a difficulty level of questions. So the higher you go on y-axis, the more difficult the question becomes. On the x-axis, we have the question number. Okay. We have 2 students. We call them case 1 and case 2 over here. And so we're going to really go from from left to right, from question numbers 1 to question number 5 for both of these students. Now, student 1 or case 1 gets the first question right, which is where the second question is slightly more challenging. You can really see as we go from the first to the second question, we are moving higher on y-axis, and y-axis is your difficulty axis. Higher on y-axis means more difficult the question becomes. Lower on y-axis means the question becomes easier. And again, it's always compared to your prior question. Then he gets a third question, which is even more challenging. He gets this wrong. You can see this with an X icon over here. He gets the fourth question, slightly easier, gets that right, and gets the fifth question, which is slightly more challenging. He gets that right, gets that wrong. So we're going to only simulate first 5 questions. Let's do that for student number 2. Student number 2 gets the first question, which is medium difficulty level, gets that wrong. The first question is usually the medium difficulty level question. Gets the second question, much easier, gets that right. You can really see we're moving down on the y-axis from 1 to 2 for case 2. Gets the third question, slightly easier, more challenging, gets that wrong. Gets the fourth question, slightly easier, gets that right, and gets the fifth question, which is slightly more challenging, and he gets that right as well. Now, the first thing I want you to tell me is who is doing better amongst students 1 and 2. Who do you think will have a higher score? Let me put in a poll question here. And who do you think is doing better, student 1 or student 2? All right, let's get a few more responses before I broadcast results. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast results, and you can really see out of the 41 students who responded, 85% of you think student 1 is doing better. About 15% or 6 of you think student 2 is doing better. For those 6 who think student 2 is doing better, I want you to tell me, those 6 only who think student 2 is doing better, if I were to end the test at this point, why is that? Why do you think student 2 is doing better? And Shruti has a question, when should she take practice test? We'll discuss that question in about 30 to 35 minutes, Shruti. So people who think student 2 is doing better, why? And you can really just say, hey, I just wanted to provide more diversity in my in the responses. Someone had to choose student 2. I wanted to back that guy up. But for those of you who think student 1's doing better, why do you think student 1's doing better? What's your reasoning for backing student 1? Why student 1? Number of difficult questions. Can you elaborate on that, please? How many, in terms of how do you differentiate student 1 versus student 2 with regards to the difficulty level of questions? Y values are higher. Okay, good. So the way to think about it is both of these students have 60% accuracy. They've answered 3 out of 5 questions correctly. Student 1 has answered 5 questions, and each of those 3 questions that he answered correctly were either at the average difficulty level or above the average difficulty level. Remember, the first question is that average difficulty or a median difficulty level question. Okay. Um, Student 2, on the other hand, also has answered 3 questions, but all 3 of them were below the median difficulty level. You can really see this, and this. Each of these questions was below the median difficulty level. In other words, if you were to really assign weights to this question, which is in some ways what the GMAT does, um, you know, student 1 score, despite having identical accuracy, would be almost twice as high as student 2 score in terms of weighted scores in the internal system of the GMAT. And for those of you who are e-GMATers who've gone through Scholarium, you guys can see the weights. Our easy questions are tagged as 4, medium are tagged as 9, have a weight of 9, and hard have a weight of 14. So um, the a difficult question has 3x as much weight as an easy question does. Okay. So when it comes to acing the GMAT, you have 2 challenges that you need to overcome. One is, when you think about it, student 2 did not even get difficult questions served. In the first 5 questions, the most challenging question was this median difficulty question, but beyond that, the test didn't even serve him any questions that were the difficulty level of which was above the median difficulty level. So your first challenge is to make sure that on the question picker on the test, you tell that question picker to serve you difficult questions. And the second is, of course, if you want to continuously get difficult questions, you want to answer those questions correctly. Does that make sense? Yes, no? Okay. So a simple refresher, just really, really important. Now, a lot of people think the GMAT, the way it works, because it's an adaptive test, it's really, really complex. But as I said, the GMAT's a really simple thing, and you'd understand how the GMAT works if you've hired someone, or in many ways, even if you've been in an interview. How many of you have hired anyone over here? Said, okay, I've got to hire someone to work for me, or maybe you're a recruiter and you're trying to assess someone. How many of you have hired anyone to work for you? Recruiter in college, okay. What about in professional life? Okay. Now, even if you haven't, I think intuitively you'd understand this because it's a very logical behavior. So let's say in an organization, you have 5 levels where the lowest level is the level of an analyst, and the highest level is one of an executive vice president. Now we don't have the CEO or the CFOs, but EVPs is as high as we will go, and you have to place a candidate in one of these 5 levels. Okay, the GMAT kind of does a similar job, except that it has about 61 levels to choose from. But where, for simplicity, we'll just put you in one of 5 levels. So let's say you get a candidate in, and which is your test taker, and 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 essentially, let's just make sure you get the first question. And the first question is at a director level, and the student messes that question up. So you say, okay, let's just put another question at a director level. Now the student gets that wrong. So what's your conclusion after the first 2 questions if the student gets these 2 questions wrong, or the candidate gets these 2 questions wrong, which are at the director level? Would you give this guy a VP level question, or would you give this guy a manager level question? What would you do? A manager level. So this is where you'd give this guy a manager level question. If the guy gets that question right, you'd probably give another manager level question. The, the guy still gets us right, then you would probably get another one. before you get another director level question to this guy. And essentially, that's kind of how the GMAT works in many ways. And then accordingly, through 67 questions, 36 in verbal and 31 in quant, it places you in one of the 60 odd levels that it's supposed to place you. Okay. So again, overall, it's a really well designed test. It's supposed to do that. Okay. Now, what it really means is your GMAT score is not governed by your accuracy. Why? Because let's say in this plot, and I'm going to erase what we wrote down here. In this plot, you got the first question right, you got second question right, you got to EVP, VP, and then you got to EVP, and you got half the questions wrong here. Even then, you would be a really valuable person, because even at EVP level, if you got half the questions wrong or about 35% of the questions wrong, you'd still be at the highest level. On the other hand, you can have a similar accuracy and you can get 35% of the questions wrong. But if those questions are at this level with very similar accuracy, you can still be at analyst level. Okay. So overall, when you think about the GMAT score, it's governed more by the difficulty level of questions that you answer correctly than the overall accuracy. And then this is really important. Why? Because a lot of people, when they come in, they ask this question, Rajat, say, hey, and a lot of our students focus way more on verbal. They really say, hey, Rajat, what's the how many questions do I need to answer correctly to get a V40 on verbal? How many of you kind of came with this kind of a notion or this kind of a question in mind? Say, how many questions do I need to answer correctly to get to a V40 level? Yes, no one. Okay. And that's a really difficult question to answer, just for this reason. And yes, I can give you a bare minimum number, but with the same accuracy, you could actually get a V25, depending on the difficulty level of questions that's served to me, and which is where I always shy away from answering that question. Okay. Now, this was just in principle how the GMAT works. This is some really, what is V25, V40? So it's a scoring scale on the verbal side of the GMAT. So a lot of people think about the GMAT score in terms of the score of 800. That score of 800, and people worry about getting a 740, and you should worry about getting a 740. But then what you don't realize is that 740 is composed of a quant and a verbal score. So you can't worry about a 740. You have to worry about a target quant and a target verbal score, and those quant and verbal scores are further composed of some other subscores, which we'll talk about. So V25 and V40, or a Q40 and Q50, are relative scorings within the respective sections. Narendra says, in the worst case, if in verbal I mark half wrong, can I still be in 700s considering better in quant? Again, I think, Narendra, you've got to think about what you're asking. What you're really saying is, I, yeah. So you'd probably need about 65-70% accuracy to get a V34, which is the minimum score that you need if you want to get to a 700, because Q50 V34 will get you a 700. So your accuracy will need to be slightly better than 50%. But then I wouldn't worry about asking that question. I'd worry about asking a slightly different question, which we'll talk about in about 10 minutes or so. So GMAT being a test of ability, let's kind of look at this over here. Okay, this is data from 2018, and the reason why this data exists from 2018 is because prior to 2018 we had what we call as the long version of the GMAT, where the verbal section was 41 questions and the quant section was 36 questions, and we had these beautiful official prep exams that would give us all sorts of insights into the scoring algorithm, and it allowed us to create proof of how the GMAT works. um, so so um, uh, so essentially what you see is attempts of two students, and when you study these attempts, the red rectangles are the ones where the students made mistake. Now, between question numbers 11 and 41, both these students had made 9 mistakes. The only difference is that this guy made 2 more mistakes, got the first 2 questions wrong. So this guy in all made 11 mistakes. This guy made a total of 9 mistakes. And you'd really say, hey, if I look at these guys through a score of accuracy, they seem very similar. But then you look at their end score, they were very different. This guy had a V43, 97th percentile. This guy had a V32, which was 65th percentile, which kind of proves the point that I was trying to prove, but with actual GMAT data. And how many of you, when you think about this, say, hey, this seems really, really scary because the GMAT seems like a really harsh test. Okay. Um, so how many of you think that the GMAT's harsh? I'm going to reopen the poll and I'm going to present it to you guys. If you think the GMAT's harsh, select yes. If you think the GMAT's not harsh, select no. And I want to see I have about 75 students here in the webinar. I want to see at least 50 responses here because you've got to put a stake in the ground. Is the GMAT harsh? Is my question. I have 37, 38 responses. And while you do that, 41, 42, 41 responses over 42. Let's get to 50, guys. Is the GMAT harsh? 43. Some more people are waking up, saying, hey, Rajat's voice no longer seems to be coming. We must need to do something. 45. 5 more. Can we get 5 more before I broadcast results? And again, one of the things that's there is, when you are in this webinar, you cannot be worrying about being wrong because no one's judging you. There's a reason why the video is not there or my video is not there. So we have 47 responses right now. Is the GMAT harsh? Yes or no? Okay, 3, 2, and 1. I cannot punish more those folks who've diligently put their answers in. Let me end the poll. So you can really see we got 49 responses. 73% of you think the GMAT's harsh, and 27% of you think it's not. The GMAT's not harsh. Let me just say this. And this is something which may be surprising for some of you because, hey, I'm someone who actually runs the test prep company. And the GMAT were truly harsh, I would be the one who'd benefit from it. But at the same time, I also want to tell you it's a beautifully designed test. It's not harsh at all. And the way to think about it is, if the GMAT were truly harsh, you wouldn't be able to get to 97th percentile while getting about a quarter of questions wrong. I mean, you're in the top 3 percentile despite making 9 out of 41, getting 9 out of 41 questions wrong. And I'm sure I can get you to 97th percentile with making 10 out of 41 questions wrong. Okay. Clearly, it's not a harsh exam. For those of you who said it's harsh, and but 2/3, 3/4 of the class said the GMAT's harsh, can you see that? I mean, or what concerns do you still have when you think about this? When you look at this data, I want you to. It's harsh because it depends on the first 10 questions. We'll tackle that point, the value of first 10 questions, yes or no. All right. What else? What other concerns do you have? And that's a good concern to put in, and we'll discuss that. What else? What are the concerns? Harshness. For non-native, English is harsh. Okay, there's no English on the GMAT. English is just a medium. It is verbal. Let me just be very clear. For those of you who think the GMAT's a test of English grammar, you're mistaken. In fact, I've hired grammarians only to fire them a couple of months later. Grammarians don't do well on the GMAT. It punishes very tricky even for a few initial mistakes. All right, good. Really good. It's really good to get these things out because I want everyone to look at this, and then we're going to go towards the end of the test. We're going to solve one question, and then next we're going to solve, CR questions. I want you to, tell me towards the end of this webinar, and also, if possible, attend the webinar, next Saturday, to really just say whatever we are talking about, is that harsh or is that simple? Okay. It gets tougher, and that's the beauty of it. Now, one thing which is clear, hopefully, out of this, is that and take a screenshot of this, because we will have, by the time we get to the end of the webinar, addressed each one of these. Okay. So it doesn't give you a chance to commit mistakes. How many of you have heard of the Indian version of the test of the GMAT, or the Indian equivalent, not the Indian version, the CAT? How many of you have heard of the CAT, or understand how the CAT works? Or in fact, even the GRE works like that too. Okay, how does the CAT work? In a CAT, you have a set of questions, okay, and essentially, every question, does it have different weights or equal weights? Does every question have identical weights, or equal weights? Now, let's say you make a couple of careless mistakes on CAT. Is there a way to make up for those mistakes? Can you make up for a couple of careless mistakes by solving some difficult problems correctly? Can you do that? No, you cannot. On the GMAT, can you do that? If you make a couple of careless mistakes? Yes. Which exam's more forgiving? The GMAT or the CAT? Or in other words, a flat test where every question has an identical weight, or an exam where different questions have different weights. Okay, just when you think about it analytically. And how difficult was that analysis that I just did? Was that very difficult? Forget about, we'll address that question. Let's kind of answer my question. We'll address that. Just, I'm going to keep, please, the question in the Q&A pod, because I have to clear the pod on the right hand side. So if you have your questions, put them. Yeah, GMAT's way more analytical, but the analysis that we just did, how difficult was that? Okay. The other piece, when you think about a flat test, and we'll take CAT as an example, not that I have anything against it, but we'll take CAT as the example. What is your strategy to ace CAT? For those of you who've taken, your strategy to ace CAT is, first, you've got to select questions that are the easiest, right? Select the questions that are the easiest and answer those, right? First is easy. Then you go towards medium difficulty level. And towards the end, if you have time, then you go towards hard questions, right? Isn't that the strategy for CAT? Right? Do you think, is this a test of ability when you think about the strategy, or is it a test of test taking skills? What kind of a test is this? One of ability or one of test taking skills? Yes. Do you think a test like that is fit to measure your ability to take on MBA coursework? Absolutely not. Okay. The GMAT, on the other hand, is a test of ability, and let's kind of talk about this. So clearly, accuracy is not a way to measure your predict your score on the GMAT. So how is the test scored? And the answer is abilities. So internally, how many of you have seen an enhanced score report or an ESR? How many of you have seen an ESR or an enhanced score report? Okay. If you haven't, and if you're an e-GMAT student, on Thursday we send a success story that has is one of our students who scored a 770. That guy shares his ESR. Okay. So when you get an ESR on an enhanced score report, you get to see, when you get a certain quant and a verbal score, you get to see your abilities. On the GMAT, what it does is it first measures your ability in SC, CR, and RC. So SC, CR, and RC, and then it computes a verbal score. Okay. So when you look at the V43 and a V32 student, the measured abilities that in SCCR and RC are they are written over here. Student 1, the guy who got a 97 percentile, had a 95th percentile ability in SC, 95th percentile ability in CR, and 87th percentile ability in RC. Now, despite making 9 mistakes, the GMAT, the test, was able to measure his ability to this level. The V32 guy had an 81st percentile ability in SC, 66th percentile in CR, and 59th percentile in RC. Okay. Now, when you look at these students through the lens of ability, do they look very different? Right? They look drastically different, right? And this is what the GMAT measures. And the beauty of it is because it's measuring those abilities through adaptive engines internally, it can gauge their scores very, very reliably. Now, if you collect upwards of 1,000 ESRs, so usually to get a reliable estimate, you need about 500 or so. But when you get to 1,000 plus ESRs, and we have about 4,000 ESRs, you kind of look at all the ability scores, and then try and predict the verbal score based on SCCR RC ability. You just run a very simple regression, nothing complex, simple regression. You get an R square of about 99.78. For those of you who know linear regression, how good is that R square? 99.78. It's too good to be true. It's almost perfect. What it really says is the ability scores on SCCR and RC, um, they predict your verbal score to almost a perfect degree. It's like a line with a linear slope. Okay. The other thing that's there is each one of these subsections have almost an equal weight. It's not that SC is way more important than CR or RC is way more important than the others. Okay. So again, the core principle is your GMAT score is governed by your ability to answer difficult questions correctly. So you've got to build that ability to answer difficult questions correctly and consistently. Okay. So let's kind of talk about what abilities does the GMAT measure. Okay, you've on the GMAT you have 5 subsections, 2 in quant and 3 in verbal. You can see the subsections here. Now, each subsection is in many ways independent, so which means you could get a 0 percentile score in SC and you could get a 95th percentile score in CR. Okay. The second thing is within the respective sections, their weights are very, very similar. Okay. So within verbal, all the subsections are very similar. Within quant, the subsections are very similar. What it means is because there are many ways to get a V40, and each one of you has different strengths, you need a target's ability for each subsection. So each one of you has, depending on your starting points, has an ideal or what I call as the most likely target ability that will get to your target GMAT score in the shortest amount of the time, in the shortest amount of time, and with the highest likelihood of success. Okay. There are 2 other points, and these 2 are really important. Regardless of whether we're talking about SC or algebra, the process of building ability, the sequence in which you do things remains identical. Okay. And then, as I said, each one of you is different, so your starting points are different. And yes, Taj, we'll share the recording with this. So one of the first things that I want you to think about is when you think about your GMAT score, ask yourself, hey, what are my starting abilities and what are my target abilities in each of these 5 subsections? Because if you achieve those target abilities, your GMAT score will be there. Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is on the GMAT, you can make mistakes and still get a great score. Here's an example of a student who improved from a 520 to a 710. It's about a 190-point improvement, went from a Q17, a V17, I'm sorry, to a V40. So about a 15th percentile to a 91st percentile on verbal, and you can really see his ability scores. You can download his ESR. I'm going to share a link. This guy was generous enough to uh, to allow to provide his ESR. So he is number 2 on this list. So not Asta but Axel, where it says download ESR. So you can download his ESR overall. The other thing which so the reason why this is really important is because when you look at the strategy that this guy followed, um, the first 10 questions usually the median difficulty level is medium, so it's average. So he did really well on the first 10 questions. So this guy focused on building ability. That's why he was able to go from a V17 to a V40. And because he had high ability, he did really well on the first 10 questions. Did pretty well as the difficulty level went up. So this is where the difficulty level is around that 70th percentile. He made a few mistakes, but not a lot. But then this is where the difficulty level truly became 90th percentile. So around that hard difficulty level. And this is when, you know, you can really see in blocks 3 and 4, he got half the questions wrong and still was able to get to a 91st percentile. Bottom line is, you can make mistakes on the GMAT as long as you make them on hard questions. That's what the GMAT's testing. Okay. Now let's talk about this, and let's answer these questions over here, which you guys have, which is, hey, what should you do about the first 10? Do the first 10 questions matter? Should you approach those differently? And should you spend more time? So each one of these questions has a yes no answer. So I want you to simply type why if you think yes for all of them, why and why if you think yes, no, yes, or why and then, or n, whatever, howsoever you want to really um, answer those. So do the first 10 questions matter? Should you approach them differently? And should you spend more time? I have about 12 answers. So type your answers, press them, and press enter. As you do that, I get the response. As soon as the broadcast results, you'll be able to see your response. About 15 answers here. Let me broadcast results. Okay. So you can really see lots of people think they should spend more time on the first 10 questions. Some people think you should approach them differently as well. Yeah. So, and some people think the first 10 don't matter. So do the first 10 matter? Absolutely they do, because, you know, every question on the GMAT matters. That's there. Should you approach them differently? No, not really. Should you spend more time? That actually becomes counterintuitive. So it's Y and N for me. That's how I would answer those. And let me explain this. Okay. One thing that I always say is, you know, you ace the test or you mess up the test, not while you are in the exam, but before the exam. So during your prep phase. So most people ace or mess their test up during your prep phase. And when I say mess their test up or ace the test, it's about, hey, your performance on that day for a majority of individuals. Let's say your ideal, you've prepared enough that you get to a 740 level. On that day, if you're reasonably calm, you know, your score is going to be between 710 and 760. And that's kind of not messing up your exam. That's my definition of not messing up your exam. Okay. A lot of people go in the test thinking that, hey, they are at a 740 level when they are not, and they end up getting a 640. Is anyone here who's done this? Say, hey, expecting a 740, go on the test, go take the test and end up with a 650, 640, or say 50 plus points less than what they thought they would get on the test. Anyone here belongs to that category? And again, really, guys, as I said, this is a really low risk environment. No one's judging you over here. And so this is something I want you to take away. You ace the test during your prep phase. You lose the test during your prep phase as well. And let me just talk about this. So let's say you're a true 90th percentile student. Okay. Now, by definition, if you're a 90th percentile student, you have these stats, which means you can answer medium difficulty questions with 90% accuracy. You can answer medium hard questions with 80% accuracy, and you can answer hard questions with 65% accuracy. You get about a third of those questions wrong, but you get 2 out of 3 questions correct. That's the definition of a 90th percentile student, and you can see those stats before you take the test. In fact, even when you're doing just SC or number properties, you can see these stats. Okay, that's really important. Now, on the test, the first 10 questions generally are around that median difficulty level, which means you're going to get a majority of those questions right if you approach them in your regular way. That's who you are, by virtue of who you are, essentially. Okay. The problem is when people try and do different things on the test, these stats no longer hold true. I've seen people, because we've dealt with upwards of 60,000 students, um, I've seen people who are really, really good because we have all of these stats. I mean, in the GMAT world, no one collects a third as much data about students as we do. And essentially, I've seen students with beautiful stats, and they would go on the test, they'll say, hey, this is the actual GMAT. I'm going to not take it the way I've been taking mock tests. I'm going to do something special. And essentially, they spend more time on the first 10 questions. They actually try and revise their answers. As a result, I've seen this thing happen where they would choose an answer which is a correct answer, and then they would look at this and they would really just say, hey, maybe this other option seems attractive. Why? Because they start to overthink. The regular process of answering questions is no longer there. When they start to overthink, they make mistakes. How many of you have done this? Just say, you've told yourself, let me be extra cautious, and by doing that, change your process. And by changing your process, initially chose the correct option and then moved over to the incorrect one. Is anyone here who's done this? Yes, no, not in GMAT, but yes. Okay. And this is important. Why? Because if you try and do something special, your natural ability reduces. Why? Because that's not who you are. And that happens in sports. That also happens. And I mean, and does anyone play sports here? Yes. If you go into a match and you're extra nervous about it and you really just think about doing things in a really special way, and that special way is not something that you've practiced, 9 out of 10 times you're going to mess up. Doesn't that happen? If you go in and you're nervous about it, the opponent seems tough, and you say, I'm going to do something special, and I've never practiced that. But you really say, this is my strategy for the game. 9 out of 10 times you will mess up. Don't do that in sports. Don't do that on the GMAT. It is counterproductive. Okay. So the takeaway is that essentially build your ability before the test and just go to the test with that attitude of expressing that ability. And if you build that ability, you'll do just fine. Okay. And this is where, people who do well, that's what they do it. I mean, if you go to a YouTube channel, we have close to 300 interviews, and interviews on our channel are not like, hey, e-GMAT's great, just do e-GMAT. These are journeys of students where they talk about, this is how I started, these are the areas that I struggled with, these are the mistakes that I made, these are the stats that I tracked, these is how I modified my methods. So these are 40-50 minute long interviews, not the reviews for e-GMAT that usually people have for their own respective channels. And what you would really see is each one of these individuals, they got to a point in their preparation where they were confident of their ability, and you'll see how they got to a point, starting from self-doubt to really just say, getting to an attitude of building ability, to building that ability to an extent where they say, oh, this is how I'm going to approach it, and if I do that, I know I'm going to get most questions right. Okay. And even then, these people make mistakes. So Magdalena scored 780. I think she had a V47, V48, and a Q50. She made mistakes on the test. This guy, Pratik, who's currently studying at Booth, he made mistakes on the test. But it's just that they made mistakes on hard questions. Why? Because they focused on building ability, and then they said, as long as I express myself, I know I'm going to do well. Okay. So your takeaways are, GMAT's a test of ability. Make sure you focus on building ability. Don't do anything when it comes to taking the test, anything different than what you do in practice. In fact, what it means is that you need to go through a phase of practice where you do practice as if you're going to take the test. Okay. All right. So with that, let's go towards the personalized study plan. Is there a statistic on how many wrong question mistakes are allowed? Yeah. There is a statistic in some ways which just says, hey, if you want to build 90th percentile ability, and get 65% accuracy in hard questions. If you do that, you'll have 98th percentile ability here and on the test. That's a statistic you need to aim for. Don't worry about how you do in the test. If you can consistently answer 65% or more of hard questions correctly, you're golden. Does that make sense? Does that help? So I won't give you a statistic for the test because it's adaptive, but in general, the metric, this is the metric you need to aim for. Now, a lot of people, when they look at this metric, go and start solving hard questions. Okay. This is equivalent to really just saying, hey, if you want to win a girl over or win a boy over, I'll talk more about girl. Just go and make sure you can bench 220. And essentially, one of the worst things you can do if someone tells you this is go and start benching 220. You're going to hurt yourself. You've got to start with your natural ability and build up to that 220. Okay. So my audio coming through still good. Mansi said my voice is breaking, but I think from my side I can see the audio still seems to be okay. Audio is good, right? Thank you. Okay. So coming back to this, don't just after this, don't start benching 220. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to waste those questions. You're going to waste time. So that's equivalent of hurting yourself in the world of GMAT. And that's where kind of building that personalized study plan comes in, and which is kind of a really nice segue to it. So my next question to you is, in your opinion, what does a study plan do? Again, guys, questions in the Q&A pod. If you put those questions in, I'm going to clear the right-hand side area. That's the place for my questions and your answers, not your questions and my answers. So questions, Q&A pod, which is right below the presentation. So my question, what does a study plan do? What's the job of a study plan? While you type your answers in, I'm going to take a sip of water. What does a study plan do? It gives you direction, keeps you on track, helps us track progress, okay? It improves direction, consistency, helps build strategy, focus, sets a goal. Okay, good. So some really good answers. So for those of you who say it gives you direction, that's really good. For those of you who say, it keeps us focused. In some ways, yes, it does do that. So a study plan definitely gives you direction. It gives you a short. So if I were to define what a study plan does in a single line, it gives you a highly likelihood path to get to the GMAT, and it so happen to get to your target score, and it so happens that that highly likelihood part also usually is the shortest path to get to your target score, which means it requires the least amount of time. Okay, there are certain things that a study plan does not do. Okay, your study plan does not help you build ability. It gives you the ability, but it doesn't help you build ability. So your study plan does not track your progress. You have metrics to track your programs. You need to build systems to track your progress. Okay. But a study plan puts you in the direction where you can make progress. Okay. Um, it lays out that plan. That's really important. In the e-GMAT world, a study plan does a few things, which is to really say it gives you a direction. How will you reach your target GMAT score? It gives you really good estimates as to how long you would need to get there, which means, hey, do you need 2 months? Do you need 3 months? Do you need 6 months? Or can you get there in 30 days, given who you are? And then it really just says, given the amount of time investment you can put in, what should you start with, and then which aspect of learning should you start with? Can you go to practicing questions directly? Should you do that? Should you start with learning the basics, and so on and so forth? So these are three questions that a study plan does. Okay, and so essentially, as I said, it gives you direction. If you summarize all of this, it gives you direction, it gives you some estimates. That's what it does. Anmol says, how do you prepare if you have a hectic work life altogether? That's a great question, and I think we'll address that after we finish the study plan. Okay. So these three goals, do they seem good? And you can realize there are no metrics there. Okay. So to illustrate how a study plan does this, I'm going to take two case studies. Two very different students, Ayush and Rafaela. Both of them successful. Both of them who needed help. Both of them were e-GMATers, and you're going to really just see how their study plans were different. Okay, so in the e-GMAT world, everyone builds a personalized study plan. We have AI-driven tools that do that. We have a simple neural network that helps build your study plan. It's not deep learning; it's a two-step neural network overall. Okay, so let's start with Rafaela, and Rafaela improved her score from a 600 to a 730. She's currently studying at HBS. Okay, so one of the first things she did was to figure out the challenge in front of her, which is where she took a Sigma X mock. And Sigma X mock, outside of the official tests, is the only mock test that will give you your individual abilities or your ESRs. Okay. Otherwise, you've got to take the real GMAT, spend $35 to get your ESR. Okay. So she took a Sigma X mock. She scored a 600. This is where you can see her score, and these were her starting abilities. Okay. What What's your observation with regards to her starting abilities? What are your observations? Okay, we can arithmetic, Quansar weak spot. Okay, RC also needs some work. Yes, absolutely. What's solid? What's good? What is good? CR and SC are really good, right? And this is really important. So then we have this tool called personalized study planner. You add those starting abilities to the personalized study planner, and you get your end abilities. And what you really see is, you'll see the RC ability change, you'll see the arithmetic algebra, and this is where the neural net comes in. It really scans thousands of test reports. It also looks at data from thousands of students that we have had and really just creates time estimates and likelihood estimates for how long it'll take for you to succeed. Okay, and then says this is what we recommend you should aim for. Okay, now there are some really interesting things over here. One of the first things you'll notice is the study plan did not push the SC and NCR target abilities. Why? Because they're already around that 90th percentile. You don't want to push them beyond that, because once you get to that 95th percentile, you get into the zone of uncertainty. On the test day, that's where variability could happen. Okay. If you are in that 95th percentile, you might get to 93rd or you might get to 98, depending on one question here or there. That variability you don't want to play on. You don't want to risk your attempt on that. Okay. So then it said, okay, given that she's so good on verbal, let's kind of strengthen her verbal here. Let's kind of build that RC ability and try and get that to as close as 90th percentile as well. Then it said on the algebra geometry side, let's kind of push that up. And because she was at 49th percentile in a starting ability, let's see if we can push that up to fifth to an 83rd percentile. And it looks at statistical data from our students who are diligent and essentially says, okay, what's the likelihood of someone getting to 83rd? And if that's a high enough likelihood, and it weighs that against the likelihood of someone getting to a 60th percentile, having started from a 15th percentile. And so that's kind of where it says, okay, arithmetic, let's not worry about going beyond a 60th percentile, and algebra geometry, there's a reasonable likelihood that you can get to an 83rd percentile, and these are the starting abilities, and that's kind of where what leads you to a 730. Now, why is it important to have these decisions right up front? Why do you think it's important to know what your target abilities are right up front? Okay, to know your weak areas, absolutely. Why else? What can you infer from this 57 percentile ability in arithmetic? To know where to spend time to help prioritization. Okay. Do you think she needs to answer really challenging questions correctly to score 60th percentile in arithmetic? Do you think she needs to answer really challenging questions? No. She's not aiming for 83rd percentile. She needs to get really high medium accuracy. But on the hard side, but 50% accuracy will do. She doesn't need to achieve that 70th percentile or 65th percentile that I've been talking about. And there's a huge difference between 50th and 65th. Okay. It may not seem much, but there's a huge difference. On algebra geometry, she needs to do that. And that's critical. Okay. And that's why it's important to be strategic about such decisions. Why? Because not only do you get good estimates, but you also, and you kind of need to figure out where you need to invest time, but you also really say, what is it that you don't need to worry about? What aspects of the syllabus do you not need to do? Okay. Now, using the starting and ending abilities, you get time estimates. And then it creates a sequence of learning. All right. And to tell you the sequence of learning, I'm going to give you a mini tutorial on how do you go about building ability. All right. So if you want to achieve 90th percentile ability, and if you're starting from a low ability point, then you have to go through 3 steps. And many of you, you're below that 600 score, which means in most subsections, your ability is low. Even someone at a 650 has really low ability in 1 or 2 subsections. So if your starting ability is less than 60th percentile, you've got to go back to learning concepts and learning application, because clearly, you have issues with both concepts and application. If your ability is below 70th percentile, then you need to make sure you know the concepts, most of them at least. You know how to apply them in a reasonable degree of finesse. So you need to master that. You need to essentially smoothen that. You need to kind of look at where your approach falls apart and then fix that. But you don't need to go through all the concepts and application, right? Because if you're already in that 60th percentile, need to go through a, a subset of concepts, but focus primarily on enhancing your application. If you're already at that 70th percentile, 71st percentile, that's kind of where you need to track really fine-grained analytics. You're tracking analytics even here and here, but the level of analytics that you track over here is just completely different level. And this is where that absolute level of personalization and feedback needs to come in, coupled with analytics. And that's where you refine to perfection. You kind of figure out those problems that you have in very specific areas and very specific kind of questions in those areas, and iron those chinks out in your armor, and that's when you get to that 90th percentile. Okay. All right. So with that in mind, with those stages of learning, I'm going to show you a chart. And in the first part of it, these are areas that this person need not study. These are areas that this person needs to study, and this is what is not required. So this is a map for her, and there's a lot of data in this, but let me just try and make sense of this data for you. So on the SC side of things, she was already at that 90th percentile SC and CR. So all she needs to do is maintain that ability. She doesn't need to go through the SC concepts or the CR concepts. All she needed to do was maintain. But on RC, she needed to start with the very basics. Why? Because the starting ability was 39th percentile. Does this make sense given the data that we have? Yes, no? Okay. Similarly, on the arithmetic side of things, she also needed to start from the very basics. And on the algebra, very similar as well, algebra geometry. Now, in the e-GMAT course, on the quant side, of course, we have really fine-grained course building capability. We have what we call as the PACE architecture, which is personalized adaptive course engine. So in algebra, the course constantly evaluated what she knew and enhanced or reduced the course content for her based on the diagnostics, how she performed on the diagnostics. And we have close to 40 diagnostics in our quant course that are built at strategic points over there. So you only learn what you need to learn. But again, you can really see in terms of refined to perfection, this only exists here. It does not exist here. Okay. So this is Rafaela. Now let's talk about Ayush. Ayush is a slightly different student. Ayush went from a 670 to a 750. In fact, he was waitlisted by Columbia because of his GMAT score. Columbia told him that, hey, we love your candidacy. We just don't like your GMAT score. So, and he attempted the GMAT twice, couldn't improve. That's when he came to us and said, I need some help in verbal. So he knew he needed help in verbal, but we said, we need to know your verbal abilities because we need to figure out where you need help. Okay. So he took the Sigma X mock. These were his scores. So you can really see SC and CR were issues. Quant, he was fantastic. RC was really, really good. So accordingly, the test said, hey, you got to buck up if you want to get to a 750, because he wasn't just looking for an admission, he was looking for an admission with scholarship. So he had to push that in, and he had to push that RC as well. So we created that study plan for him. Again, remember, lower than 55th percentile, you've got to go back to concepts. More than 70th percentile, you've got to refine to perfection. Okay. So very similar legend. These are the areas where he already has ability, so he need not study. This is where he needs to focus, and this is what's not required. Okay. So this is his legend. So in algebra and arithmetic, all he needed to do was maintain. In RC, we said you've got to master application, because you want to push that 80th percentile to 93rd percentile. So we want you to do this in the e-GMAT way. But in SC and CR, he had to do everything, despite the fact that he had gone through the Manhattan book, done, as I said, he'd done 2 attempts and not succeeded. So it put in about 9 months before coming to e-GMAT. What he said, your foundation doesn't exist, so you've got to do this. And this is where, Neha, your question still comes in, where you say, if I'm doing good in medium and medium hard, and but not in hard questions, clearly you either have an issue with certain concepts, but you definitely have an issue with applying things properly. And we're going to solve an SC question, and you'll see that issue being exposed if that issue does exist in SC. But if it exists in CR and RC, then of course we'll have to do something slightly different. But clearly, if you're unable to do hard questions, despite doing well in medium and medium hard, it's an issue with application. Okay, but then let's compare them. Ayush versus Rafaela. Even though Ayush went from a 670 to a 750, Rafaela went from 600 to a 730. Both of them, the where they spend their time, what their study plans were very different. Ayush had to spend almost 3 dedicated weeks on SC. Rafaela practically had to spend no time on SC or on CR. Rafaela had to spend twice as much time on RC as Ayush did, and a lot more time on quant overall. Okay, but then there's no one right study plan for anyone. So some people really ask for a 2 month study plan or a 3 month study plan. Do you guys think had Ayush and Rafaela looked at a generic study plan, they would have succeeded? Or in many ways, they didn't. They tried doing those. At least Ayush tried doing that. But unless and until you personalize that study plan to your needs, you're not giving yourself the best chance to ace the GMAT. Okay. How they approach different subsections was very different as well. As you can really see, for Rafaela in quant and RC, he had to start from basics. Ayush had to start from basics in SC and CR. Actually, this is wrong. This had to be start from basics as well. Okay. Now, does this make sense? Whatever I said, does it make sense in the context of your own preparation? Does this seem logical in terms of this? I mean, shouldn't GMAT preparation or planning for the GMAT be like this? And the reason why doing this is important is because at 730 plus score in today's world is really important if you're looking to go to a top B school. Okay. How many of you friends who are who's studying at top B schools or at a tier 2 B school? Okay. Now, the US is not going through a great time when it comes to jobs, right? But those studying at top B schools, they all have internships, or a majority of them have internships. Those studying at tier 2 B schools, many of them don't have internships. If you go and talk to them, if they're in year 1, if they're in year 2, but half of them from tier 2 B schools have a job, the other half do not. Has anyone talked to their friends? about their internships, their jobs. And this is kind of the value of a top MBA, because when the economy is good, most people get a job. When the economy isn't great, that's where the value starts to come in. Of course, the kind of education that you get from a top B school, that's unparalleled. And the lessons that you get, the network that you get, that's something you're not going to get from a tier 2B school. Okay. And so since we deliver more 700 plus scores than anyone else in the world, we can do some research um, that other people cannot. And that's something which is and when we did this research in 2021, and so we contacted 500 of our students. Their GMAT scores were in the range of 690 to 780. So we had 500 people, and it's not just about their GMAT scores. So we collected everything about these guys. We collected their GMAT scores, their backgrounds, their ethnicity, which schools did they apply to, and then of course where did they get an acceptance from, and what kind of scholarship. Okay, so we kind of did all of these things for them, and essentially, as we did the stats, what we found was, yes, people got into M7 schools with the school with scores in the range of 710 to 730, but the acceptance rate of individuals who had 740 plus was twice as much. And then we're talking about a statistically significant sample here overall, and that was very, very interesting for us. Yeah. When it comes to scholarship, what we found was that 45% of all students who went to an M7 school got some sort of a scholarship. 82% of all students who went to a T20. So T20 is outside of M7. Okay, so 20 top 20 schools outside of the Magnificent Seven. And then overall, in the entire population, 62% of all students who had a 740 or higher, whether they went to an M7 or a T20 school, were offered a scholarship. The third thing, 740 versus 760. So we really, really had to struggle to do this because you needed a statistically significant sample. So we this was something that we did towards the end, because we wanted to figure out how much more money can you get from B schools if you got a 760. And typically this was the difference between median amounts. Now, depending on the school, these amounts change. So if you go to a T20 school outside of M7 with a 760, more often than not, you'll get a full ride. So you have a Tuck over there, you have Columbia, and you have GSP Chicago or Booth. Okay. Hopefully these numbers motivate you, and you won't see this research anywhere else because no one else has the student body to go to and get this data. Okay. And here are some anecdotal examples of people who actually leverage this. Victor took the GMAT, I think, 3 times, improved his score. This guy is from uh, I forgot which country in Africa, but in the middle of Africa. This guy doesn't speak perfect English, but he took the GMAT multiple times and made sure he got a 770. He got full ride from a bunch of schools overall. Okay, you can see the names over there. And for him to get to V44, which is a 98th percentile, this is where he used those fine-grained analytics to improve. Um, he got about $350,000 worth of total scholarship. Kong Bui, another student. So I'm not giving you people who flawless English who are consultants at Bain McKinsey prior to starting their GMAT journey or their MBA journey. Why? Because those people with effort will get to good scores. But these are people who truly worked hard, did not have the pedigree, and yet got excellent scores, and then have gone on to do really good things. Again, if you go on LinkedIn, you can really look these people up, all of them. So this guy received got a 760, got 5 full rides. Now he went to Ohio Fisher because the school was so impressed with that GMAT score and the consistency with which he did things, that they not only offered him a full ride, but they paid him $1,700 a month to study there. I mean, he actually earned more money than what he was earning prior to starting his MBA. Overall, if you combine all schools, his total scholarship was about $500,000 or so that he received. Now, this guy didn't have any extracurricular. A lot of people think when it comes to the to admits and scholarships, extracurriculars play a huge role. Yes, they play a good role, but essentially not a huge role. Also, um, if you watch his interview and his interviews over here, what you really see is this guy kept things really simple. He knew what he had to write in the essays. He prepared really well for the interview. Of course, he has the GMAT, and as long as he did that, he got all. And he applied to the right schools, by the way. Okay. There's another student who got into Wharton into Wharton and got about $180,000 uh, worth total scholarship. Okay. And if you go look at our YouTube channel, or in fact, we have an admits and scholarship page, you'd be able to see journeys of students where they've gotten upwards of $10 million worth of total scholarships. We've stopped doing this a year and a half back. But then even, and you see Ayush over here as well. Um, but essentially what you'd see in these journeys is not just how they prepare for the GMAT. So you have the GMAT journey, but you also have their MBA journey as to how they approach that scholarship. And as you look at this, it's watch them. They're really um, it's very motivating to watch their MBA admit journeys, because it tells you what you can do. And some of them also talk about their experience at various B schools. So we have some of those on our YouTube channel as well. And then as you watch those, um, what you're going to find is how transformational uh, the entire MBA experience is. Okay. So as a link to our YouTube channel, the first one is there. And also, if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, you should connect with me on LinkedIn as well. All right, with that, let's go. Let me ask this question. Anmol asked this question some time back, and I should have taken this. Um, you know, how do you prepare if you have a hectic work life alongside? How many of you struggle with this? A hectic work life. Okay. One of the most important things that's there is when it comes to preparing for the GMAT, you've got to change things with your life. And this is, one of the traits that you need to have. You shouldn't leave your job. Let me just be very clear. Um, unless you say I've got to take the GMAT in 25 days and there's no and I really need to do it. There's no other way. That's the only scenario in which I'll ask you to take a sabbatical from your job and do it. But other than that, do not leave your job. Okay. So you need about between 90 minutes to 2.5 hours to prepare for the GMAT during the weekday, and about 4 hours per day to prepare for the GMAT during the weekend. Okay. So you've got to figure out a way to get this time out, and you've got to make sure that people around you buy into this. If you don't have that, don't bother studying for the GMAT. Let me just be very clear, because you are going to fail. Any prep course, including e-GMAT prep course, will only do 30 to 40% of the work. But that 30 to 40% will be useless, absolutely useless, if you don't have the other 60% in a diligent fashion. So you've got to figure out a way to get those 2 hours or 90 minutes out of your day. Now, what it means is you've got to do two things. One, some sacrifices are required, which regards to where you spend your time. The second thing is some changes are required. So for those of you, and this is where data collection is really useful. Most of us cannot work. Let me just be absolutely certain, cannot work more than 8 to 9 hours. Really important to know. You may be in the office for 12 hours, but I can tell you, I've tried using my brain for more than 8 hours. It just simply is not possible. So the first thing is when you get data and figure out where you spend time. Okay. The second thing is figure out how you're going to fix that. Where you're going to create time, and where would that time come from if you've got to stop watching, a certain amount of TV or stop going to movies. Then figure out who else watches that TV with you. If you have to study during your commute, then figure out who do you sit with. Sometimes people actually move from shift from uh, essentially taking the metro to taking a cab because it's much easier to study in a cab. Okay, so so that's, some people spend time cooking, and you can cook, you can hire a cook, or you can cook for the entire week and package things up. But essentially, if you don't track where you spend time today, and if you don't plan where that time is going to come from, that time isn't going to appear by itself magically. First of all, I'm going to take the specific case, and I'm sorry that you lost your job, but in general, how many of you have done that? And again, I'll say 90 minutes to 2 hours during the weekdays. So, and 4 hours per day during the weekend. How many of you have done that? And then we'll really address the question that's there. Okay. Yes, it's doable. Doing it now. If you don't track where you spend time today, you are going to fail. Let me be very, very clear. If you don't, and you've got to talk to people around you, your friends, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, make sure your parents, make sure the buy-in exists. If that buy-in doesn't exist, then there is a problem. Okay, and getting their buy-in is really about you selling your dream to them. If you can't get their buy-in, then A, either you don't know how to sell it, you've not done enough research as to why you need the MBA, or B, they don't care about you. Let me just be very blunt here. Okay. Now let's talk about this particular individual who was laid off. I'm looking for a job and studying. Any suggestions? My worry is the new job will demand more from me, and the worry is also that jobs are not coming easy. I was in a mid to senior level. So one thing that I always tell people is you've got to focus on one core thing at one time. One core new thing. Let me just be very, very clear. And this is an advice when it comes to something that you'd hear from B schools as well. So when you go to a B school, a lot of people want to do two things. They would, and you hear this term called dual career changes, or triple career changes. IESC does this really well. So they really say a lot of people want to change their function, a lot of people want to change their industry, and some people also want to change their geography. That's the triple career changer that IESC calls it. And if you want to do that, you cannot change all three at once. Okay, if you want to change your industry, your function, and your geography, you first have to do internships in a different industry, but where your function remains the same. Or more likely, you want to do things in the same industry, but in a different function. That's actually a better path. Why? Because if you know the industry, and if you've been doing an MBA, you do an internship in a different function, they're much more likely to take you because, hey, you've done an MBA and you know the industry as well. So if you are in oil and gas, and if you want to go from operations to marketing or strategy, start with oil and gas. Unless you want to go in consulting, and where, because consulting already has different verticals in there. Okay, change your function first, because and learn that function. Then if once you've mastered that function, you can leverage that knowledge of function in the second internship and change your industry. In the same way, if you're laid off, okay, so you've got to do one of two things. You can't really go into a completely different job which demands more from you and still study for the GMAT, or you can't really be studying intensely for the GMAT and also be looking for a job. So either decide that, hey, I want to get done with the GMAT because because I'm studying full time. I need no more than a month and a half, and then apply for jobs, or apply for jobs and not study for the GMAT for 6 months and then study for the GMAT. The good thing is your GMAT score is valid for 5 years, so you can do one or the other. There's no right or wrong. I don't know your personal situation, but the only bad decision here, in my opinion, is to do both. Does that make sense for the person who asked this? Don't do don't do both. Do just one thing. Okay. And be very clear, because you'd see the challenging thing is in studying for the GMAT and doing what this individual is doing is that when you're studying for the GMAT, you'll see people around you having fun. And you've had that fun too. So restraining yourself is going to be one of the most challenging things. Okay. But it's this challenge that you need to overcome if you think yourself to be worthy to be a leader in the next decade or so. Similarly, for this individual who's lost his job, he'll see his friends who've lost their job get jobs, and he'll have to deal with the fact that they're now earning and he is not. But again, as long as you know you're making that conscious decision, as long as you write it down, you'd be able to go back to that piece of parchment or paper. Sorry, I'm a Harry Potter fan, so I call it parchment. And you'd be able to look at it and say, "This is the decision that I made. This is why I made that decision. I believe it's going to lead to a better future for me." Okay, but really important to do this. Do we help with the applications? Unfortunately, we don't. I mean, it's just the volume of students that we deal with. It's not possible for us to help with applications. Just to be very clear, we do work with a lot of admission consultants, but we as of now we don't do that. Okay, and it's because of this these analytics and this planning that we've accounted for 3 out of 5 700 plus scores reported on GMAT Club since 2021. Okay, so it's not just this year, last year, it's over the last 2.5 years or so. Okay. And the remaining 40%, all of these. Okay. And a lot of people know us for our verbal, but again, I think this data is still middle of 2022, but we also accounted for majority of Q49 or higher scores. Okay. And of course, 5-star reviews, way more than what anyone else has. And this is why when you look at MBA journeys, and this is data again from 2022, this is now approaching 300. Lots of GMAT success stories on our YouTube channel. Lots and lots of scholarship stories on our YouTube channel, and MBA admit stories as well. Sure, please write to me on LinkedIn. Okay. People say if you already have 10 plus years of experience, an MBA may not add much value. I don't know who those people are. Let me just be very blunt there. If you're seeking an MBA, this means you're stuck in your career. This means you see gaps. If you see gaps, then clearly you need to fill those gaps. Okay. And you know yourself. So I think that's one of those things which is really important where you've got to ask who are those people, what have they achieved, and is that all you want to do in your life that they have done, or do you want to go further and beyond? Okay. And that's very important. And does more experience reduce your chances? If you don't have a good enough reason to do an MBA, then yes. And essentially, if you can't justify why an MBA at this point in your career, yes. And minimum, usually about 3 years of work ex. Okay. So let's talk about how do you build ability. Okay. That's really important. And why is it that so many people get stuck at 60th percentile? So I'm going to compare two individuals, 60th and 90th percentile. And both of these individuals, um, I'm going to do this just in the context of sentence correction. Both of these individuals, are very, very similar. They have 30th similar starting ability. Their capability to improve is very, very similar as well. And they spend similar amount of time preparing for sentence correction. Now 60th percentile in the context of the GMAT is being in the top 80,000 students, 90th percentile as being in the top 20,000 students or so. Okay, so let's see how a 60th percentile student prepares. Okay, and again, remember, 90th percentile is about almost achieving perfection. A 60th percentile student approaches GMAT sentence correction with an attitude where the person says, hey, GMAT SC is about learning 8 major error types. These error types belong in these categories. So I'm going to, as long as I know the concepts, I know what needs to be done. Now I'm going to go practice. And the person goes and practices, uses splits as the primary technique to solve questions. For them, only if splits don't work, they go towards meaning. Okay. They go through the preparation phase or the learning phase fairly quickly, and the kind of feedback, the number of feedback points they get during that prep phase is between 7 and 10 feedback points. Their time spent between learning and practice, they spend about 30% of their time learning, 70% of the time practicing and solving questions. And by the way, most of these people don't do this in a dedicated fashion. While they're studying for SC, they're also studying for quant or CR or RC. So that SC prep is not a fixed 14-15 day prep, but something that stretches across 31, 32, 33 days. A 90th percentile student rarely focuses on learning something different. Yes, the student learns those concepts, but the student focuses on learning how these concepts morph in 200 odd sentence structures at the GMAT tests. For them, to be able to figure this out, they use meaning as the primary technique. Okay, for them, meaning isn't an error type. They take a lot more feedback while learning, but 10 times as much feedback as a 68th percentile guy. And they spend way more time learning because of the fact that they spend that much more time learning. Remember, this guy also has 40 hours. This guy also has 40 hours. Okay. They need way less practice. And they spend this time in a consistent set of 2 weeks or so. People who are 60th percentile, does this seem familiar to you? Does this seem familiar? Learning means stage one of learning concepts, learning application. Okay. Lots of people do this. Most people who come to these sessions do this because that's why they are there. Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate. It's not about not taking the test, it's about how you learn. Okay. You follow the second way, it's more comfortable. That's good. That's really nice. Okay. So I think the whole fundamental piece is because GMAT essay tests about 200 odd sentence structures, it's really difficult to achieve perfection. Um, and if you don't get that feedback over here, okay, and so just to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an SC question. Now my goal here is not to teach you sentence correction, but just to demonstrate the value of sentence structures. And I want you to answer this question the same way you generally approach SC questions. So let me put in a poll question. As a poll question. I'm going to reopen poll. I want each one of you to select still solving, or rather about 20-25 of you to select still solving. So that way, when you change your option to another answer choice, I know you're done. That way you call time and I don't. So 25 people to say still solving. I have 64 people in the session, 25 people to say still solving before I show the question. 22, 23 people, one person chose choice C. 24, one more person before I show the question. Good. Again, you haven't seen the question. You don't know if choice C is correct. All right, here's the question. I'm going to mute myself for 2.5 minutes or so, which you need for this question typically. And then let's see how you guys do it. About 60% of the class is done. Let's get those answers in. All right, about 90 odd. This one person isn't done. So I'm going to give that person 3 more seconds. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Now, before I broadcast results, I'm going to ask you this one question. There are two ways people do a question such as this. One is they focus on the meaning-based approach. The second is they use splits. Which approach did you use to to answer this question? Meaning, splits, or combination of those, either approach. Meaning. Okay. AM works. You don't need to write it down. Elimination, tried the meaning. Okay. In this question, split was difficult, so meaning. All right. Always first go with meaning. For those of you who don't know this, my co-founder Pyle Tandon invented the meaning-based approach. If you go and look at Beat the GMAT, which is where we first started posting, you'd see in 2000 and in 2010, which is where when we launched the meaning-based approach, we launched the e-GMAT platform, the SC course in 2010. This was a time when we were criticized for the meaning-based approach, and people said there's nothing in GMAT SC. In fact, you can look at a post by Stacy Koprinz in September of 2011 where she said, "Hey, it seems GMAT saying meaning is important in SC right now." Yeah, but meaning-based approach, most experts didn't accept it till 2016 or so, which is where we were in the third generation of our meaning-based approach. But this is how you guys did. Half the class thinks choice C is correct. Then the next most popular choice is choice E, and then some people think choice B is correct as well. Okay. So let's see how we will go about doing this. I'm going to, again, as I said, my goal is not to teach you GMAT sentence correction. My goal is to talk about why is it that people don't improve. So as someone said, yeah, it's very difficult to do splits on this question. Why? Because we'll demonstrate this. You have the church coined or the church coined as beginning in choices A and D. You have two choices that start with while, and then you have one that starts with that. You have a contrast word, but, and four choices, and then there are slightly different sentence structures in each one of these answer choices. And hopefully you've been able to see the kind of sentence structures that exist, and all these choices, each one of these choices is trying to express the same meaning. Okay, so let's kind of focus on the meaning-based approach. And in the meaning-based approach, what you do is, especially when you have a long sentence, you read it in chunks and you pause and you kind of figure out what is it that the author is trying to do. You're not looking to figure out what are the errors in it. You're trying to figure out what's the job that this sentence is supposed to do. What meaning is it supposed to communicate? Because once you figure out the job that the sentence is supposed to do, then you can evaluate whether in the current form, whether the sentence is doing the job effectively, or is there another option that you need to look for. Okay, just very, very simple stuff. As I say, everything on the GMATs, very logical, very simple. It's not rocket science. People at SpaceX do much more challenging things than what we do. Um, uh, but we believe that what we do is also fairly important. So, so yeah. So let's look at this. The church coined the date February 14th as Valentine's Day. Why? Because with an ulterior motive to Christianize the pagan celebration of Lupercalia or Lupercilia. That aspect is claimed by a few experts. But then the author says, but it is celebrated on this day to honor the anniversary of Valentine's death or burial. That is the more prevalent belief. Now, when you think about this, the job this sentence has to do, the sentence has to communicate two claims, and the author wants to do this um, about why February 14th is celebrated as Valentine's Day. Claim one is that the church did it and they had a specific motive. That motive was ulterior. Claim two is that it's done to honor Valentine's death or burial, or anniversary of Valentine's death or burial. Claim one is by a few experts. Claim two is by another set of people. It's the more prevalent belief. Now, with regards to you, I want you to tell me which all aspects were you unable to identify when you solved the sentence. when you solve this question by yourself? Which aspects were you unable to identify when you solve this question by yourself? This is a multiple response, so you can choose 1, 2, and 3. You don't have to choose one. You can choose all three. You can choose 2 out of 3. You can, of course, also choose 1 out of 3. Mark all the aspects that you were unable to identify. 3, 2. I'm going to broadcast results so that others can put in. And you can really see aspect 2 is what a lot of people are saying. Aspect 3 is really popular as well. Aspect 1, pretty much everyone got that. And this is really important. Why? Because what you would really see is the reason why people made mistakes and the kind of choices they finally gravitated towards. Um, that's a direct relationship with regards to which aspects they faltered on. Like, we can predict why they faltered and what choice would they choose, would they go for, if we figure this thing out. Yes, you mark what you could not identify while solving the questions, Supro. And this feedback's really important for you as well, because this tells you why you're faltering, where you're faltering. And once you know that, improving becomes a lot easier. Okay. So with that, let's move forward. We already did that. So if you did all three, you know what the intended meaning is, and then you faltered because of either your the fact that you didn't know a grammatical aspect, or because you didn't take these aspects forward while evaluating the answer choices. There are only two reasons why you would falter if you are in this camp. If you are in this camp, you will falter. The grammar piece doesn't even come, and you falter because you don't even know what the sentence is supposed to do. So grammar, I won't even bother about evaluating you on grammar over there. Okay. Does this look simple? This is category 1 of mistake. This is category 2 of mistake. Those are it. That's my high level hierarchical categories. Simple enough? You guys are with me? Yes, no? Okay. Let's kind of look at the original sentence and what's the problem with this. So in the original sentence, you have these verbs, they don't have subjects. You have the subject verb pair here, you have a subject verb pair here, but these verbs, is and is claimed, they don't have subjects overall. Okay. So that's the error. Clearly, missing subjects is a big error. It's a deterministic error on the GMAT. We can't have that. Okay. Now, let's kind of analyze choice B. While with an ulterior motive to Krishna, the pagan celebration of Lupercalia, a few experts do claim. Okay. In choice B, who has the ulterior motive? Who has the ulterior motive as per choice B? The experts. Why will the ulterior motive to Christianize the pagan celebration of Lupercalia? A few experts do claim. Is that the job the sentence is supposed to do? Absolutely not. The claim 1 was given by the church with a specific motive, not by the ulterior motive did not belong to experts, it belonged to the church. The sentence fails to do that job, which is why this one is wrong. Or in other words, it not only fails to do that job, the church's motive is gone. Okay, you can no longer say the church did it with a specific motive. That motive is gone. Okay. Because of this, choice B is wrong. And again, if you faltered over here, you faltered because essentially you did not focus on the meaning part, and you did not focus on the meaning that this choice is trying to communicate. Okay. This is what we say a modifier error leads to a meaning error. Grammatically, the choice was fine. If the author wanted to communicate that the experts had the ulterior motive, there's nothing wrong in this choice, but that's not what the author wants to do. Let's look at choice C. Lots of you chose choice C. You can see how you guys polled over here. About half of you chose choice C. While a few experts claim that the church coined it blah 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 with an ulterior motive, their more prevalent belief is that what the author wants to communicate? Is the second belief by the same group of experts, or is it by a different group? No, it's by a different group. Again, a very elegant choice, but absolutely incorrect. This choice is wrong. Why? Because it just suggests that the same set of experts share the two stated claims. Nothing wrong with grammar. Grammatically, this choice is fine, but it doesn't do the job that the author wants it to do. People who say they follow the meaning-based approach, how did they miss this? A lot of you said we follow the meaning-based approach. I want you to tell me, why did you miss this aspect? And how will you correct your approach or enhance your approach to ensure that you don't repeat this mistake? Because remember, I said if you want to achieve 90th percentile, you've got to have 65% accuracy in hard questions. These are the changes, these are the fine tunings that you need to do to get to that 65% accuracy. This is not a medium level question. You'd get medium level questions right with this approach, but or even medium hard to a good degree, but not hard. Okay. People who chose this, is that clear? Come on, guys, I'm not seeing a lot of participation as to how you're going to fix this. Because that's what's valuable, not the fact that you made a mistake over here. Because you made a mistake, that part's done. The question is, how will you not repeat that mistake? That's the more important thing. As they say, people who don't make mistakes don't push themselves enough. But then people who make mistakes and don't learn from them also don't make the most of their life. Okay. So I'm hoping to see some corrective actions over here. Let's look at choice D for me. Check reference. Choice D is probably the only difficult choice here, in my opinion, if you follow the meaning-based approach. That's the only difficult choice because it plays on a nuance. Rejecting choices A, B, and C should have been really easy if you followed the meaning-based approach. And to do this, I'm going to really talk about making a claim versus providing information. So when you think about the statement, Apple is the market leader is claimed by Forbes magazine, or that Apple is the market leader is claimed by Forbes magazine. In this case, are you communicating information? Yes. Are you making the claim here? Absolutely not. And should you be blamed if it turns out that Apple is not the market leader or not a market leader? Can you see this? As an author, if you say that Apple is the market leader is claimed by Forbes magazine, all you're doing is communicating information. You're not saying that I believe Apple is the market leader. Is that clear to everyone? I want to see some yeses and nos. Yeses or nos. Ideally, all yeses. Now, let's kind of look at this. Apple is the market leader as claimed by Forbes magazine. So I've removed this is versus as. So those who are saying no, let's go back over here. What's not clear? Why should you not be blamed? What's not clear? Why should you not be blamed if Apple doesn't turn out to be the market leader? Because you're merely saying, hey, it's written in Forbes magazine, Apple is the market leader. You're not saying whether you believe it. All you're just saying is it's written there. Okay. And by the way, if you read the newspaper, you'll really see good authors, people they would do this again and again. They would give you someone X says to make you believe that they believe that is the case, but they're not never going to say the claim's mine unless and until they've done the research. And which is the difference between reporting and journalism. Journalism tries to prove and where the authors back their claims with research data. Reporting simply says this XYZ said this said this said this, and so on and so forth. Yes, when you when you replace is as it's not that this claims by Forbes magazine, but you are also backing that claim. Okay. So you will know. In this case, it's why. It's all why. Are you communicating information? Yes. You're not saying Apple is the market leader, just that, but you're saying Forbes magazine says, and I believe that. Okay. Um, Pfizer's dose is effective as stated in this report. You are backing that claim. Yes. You're saying, I read that report, I believe it. And by the way, to back this piece, I'm also mentioning this report for you. It's not confusing. You use it in your everyday life. It's just that you use it subconsciously. Let me give a more let's do this. Actually, I'm gonna try and write things out. Okay. When you say this, Pfizer's vaccine works as proven by the journal of as proven by the results in Journal of Medical Sciences. Aren't you your claims based on those results? But you're saying I believe those claims, right? When you use the word as, so you ought to be blamed if it turns out it doesn't work. Okay. And that's a really important difference here. And this is something that's tested left and right in GMAT RC, by the way. Not tested as much in SC, only in very difficult questions, but in RC, when it comes to inference questions, that's kind of the difference. What can you infer? It's what the author believes in, not what the author is simply stating. Okay. So, again, really, really important. Is there any grammar rule here in all of this? No, it's just simply logic. This is what the GMAT tests you on. Okay. Can you tell the logic as to how it becomes our claim? It's because when you say as, you're proving your claim. The word as is used to prove your claim. You're using the next part of the sentence. This part is to prove your claim. Apple is the market leader as claimed by Forbes magazine. This part two is used to prove one for you to make your point. Here, this two and this one are merely communicating information. Okay. All you're saying is, I'm a messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. I have no judgment of it. And this happens a lot, where if you think about actions that you take, buy Reliance as recommended by the stock analyst. When you say buy Reliance, as the stock of Reliance as recommended by the stock by this analyst, you are actually giving the recommendation to buy Reliance, Reliance's stock. But when you change that statement into this, that we should buy Reliance is recommended by it. All you're saying is this analyst says that we should buy Reliance. I don't know whether that's correct or not. Okay. In choice D, in the original choice, the author does not make any claims. The author is merely a communicator of information. In both constructs of choice D, the author is backing those claims. He's not only communicating information, of which of course he is, but he's backing those claims as well. And which is why choice D is wrong. Okay. When you say it's celebrated on this date is to blah 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 blah. So the author is backing that claim. Both those claims. Which brings us to our correct choice. Yes, choice A is in line with the first example, where the author is merely communicating information. He is not backing those claims, which is why choice D is wrong. Okay. In choice D, the author is backing both claims. He uses the word as, which is why the correct answer is choice E. That the church coined the date blah 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 is claimed by few experts, but the more prevalent belief is it is celebrated on this day. The author is merely communicating information. He's added both the subjects, and everything's hunky dory. Okay. The question is, why is it that people reject choice E? And a lot of people reject choice E because they say, hey, what the hell is this that doing up front? How can a sentence start with the word that? Then they really say there has to be a that here, always. And some people really say this is claimed as passive. So this has to be incorrect. How many of you rejected this answer choice because of one of these three reasons? Okay. Again, remember, when it comes to the GMAT, don't go by grammar constructs. Really, you should not do this. Focus on the meaning first. A lot of people think awkwardness is a really good reason to reject answer choices. Okay. A lot of these misconceptions exist. People think an answer choice with being is always wrong. Some people think something should not start with that. Some people think there should always be a connector cannot be eliminated when it's used as a connector. In fact, we recently on our YouTube channel launched a video which gave you a framework as to when you can eliminate that and when is it that you cannot eliminate that. Okay, so take a look at this. The church coined the date is claimed by a few experts. Look at this. Look at the construction and map it to the Apple construction, and you will see this is the more prevalent belief, but it is celebrated is the most prevalent belief. Okay, so map this, and this is where the sentence structure approach is really important, because it tells you how sentence structures combine together to get to a meaning. Okay, but again, as I said, my goal here was not to teach you SC. We have an SC webinar where we do just that. But could you really just see that when it comes to difficult questions, it's about that play of sentence structures. It's not about grammar as much as it's about sentence structures and meaning. Could you see that? Could you also see just in one question how many sentence structures exist? And that's, I think, critical for you to understand. When it comes to that 90th percentile, it's not going to be grammar. And this is where data is really important, where you've got to start with the right foundation. You've got to build that foundation. So a lot of people say, hey, I'm going to learn grammar first, and then I'm going to focus on, at the later stage, learn meaning. That's one of the that's a really inefficient approach. Why? Because when you start learning grammar without learning meaning along with it, then you start applying grammar and you start looking for splits, and then it becomes really difficult for you to get to meaning. Why? Because your brain's used to splits. You don't want to inculcate those bad habits. In fact, people who come in with those bad habits, we have to work with them to remove those bad habits. Even while you're learning grammar, you've got to get feedback to really say, hey, are you able to identify all incorrect uses of verb ing modifiers by really seeing the role that it's playing in the sentence? Are you able to do that for verb ed phrases? Are you able to figure out when they act as verbs, when they verb ed forms, when they act as verbs, or when they act as modifiers? Are you able to figure that out? Okay. And it is that feedback that helps each one of you improve. So if you think about it, um, we have about 92 learning activities on our SC course. And each of these learning activities is about 30 minutes long, and each learning activity gives you about 3 levels of feedback. So you have 92 times 3 is about 276 different levels of feedback. And each one of you from each learning activity would have different feedback points. When you study using a book or a system that doesn't give you feedback with those learning activities, then essentially that refinement doesn't happen. It's not that you should excel in each learning activity right in the first go, but if you haven't done well, you definitely should do revision. In fact, for those of you who are our paid students, you can really see every practice quiz tracks when you did revision, how much time you spent while doing revision. Okay. And it's only when you achieve perfection in those areas, that's when you get to that 65-70% accuracy in hard questions. And that's when you hit that 90th, 95th percentile ability in that particular subsection. Okay. This is just a number of feedback points that we have in just the SC course, and pretty much every other course has a very similar learning architecture. And people who succeed, who act on that feedback, and which is when they act on this feedback, which is when we get to those scores. Okay. With that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you guys. Hopefully, you guys found the session useful, uh, and learned a thing or two about it. Now, if you need help building your study plans, then essentially, uh, uh, you guys can can book a call using this link overall. So you can book a call as well. If you're a paid student, you already have access to a study planner tool. So you already can use it infinite number of times, but the others can do that as well. So I have a couple of questions here, and let me also share the session PDF while I do that. So, so how do you manage burnout when it's been many years since you studied at this skill? So first of all, this is not a huge skill. Let me just say this. The second thing which is there is, the fact that you've been working for so many years is really, really good, because when people go into professional life, they get a sense of what's right versus what's wrong, and that helps them prepare well. In fact, we really love individuals who have 10 plus years of experience. Why? Because when they say they're going to spend 2 hours, they spend those 2 solid hours, and we don't really see people studying and then going to YouTube in between and so on and so forth. Okay. So that's there. Now, having said that, you ask a very important question: how do you manage burnout? And which is where you have to put in strategic breaks. So for example, when you're studying for the SC course, finish SC in 2 weeks, go to cementing, and then for a couple of days definitely go out, refresh yourself, come back, and then do RC or quant. And then as long as you take breaks during those planned intervals, you are golden, because once you've cemented, you're not going to forget anything. Okay. Vartha says, please build a mobile app for e-GMAT. Vartha, we've thought about it because we have a fairly large technology team. But the problem with building a mobile app is that a lot of you will start studying on your cell phones. And frankly, when you're practicing questions, studying on your cell phones is not the best way to study. And then what's going to happen is a lot of you will essentially study, waste the content, and then come back and say we need more content. I would rather, I mean, tablets work beautifully. I mean, all of our applications, they work on cell phones really well. But I wouldn't, and I'd use cell phones for revision, but not for studying. So if you truly want to study while you're on the move, then I would say get a tablet, and then you'd find things work beautiful. And again, our goal is to make sure that you succeed. Can someone go for an MBA directly after their bachelor's? Absolutely, they can go. It's just that they're not going to get admission. Uh, so that's really, really challenging. And I don't believe doing your MBA right after your bachelor's is advisable. It's just that you won't know what to do, and it would not be wise for you to do this. Now, if you want to do a master's in management, learn analytics, that's a completely different thing. How long will it take if you want to go from a 500 to a 720? That's a good question, but 270, 280. 300 hours is what you need. Now, what does that translate to in terms of your number of weeks of study is completely dependent on who you are. Okay. Naman has a follow-up question where he says he's planning for an MBA in finance. And again, first of all, Naman, there is, when you think about an MBA in finance, you're still doing an MBA, which means you still have to to have those leadership traits. You still have to understand. I mean, for example, if you're doing an MBA in finance, you're aiming for either a CFO role or eventually, or you're also aiming for something in private equity, or you're aiming for something in venture capital. And in all of these things, more than your ability to do finance, it's your leadership skills that are important. It's your ability to see things that are important. So that's something which is extremely important. And when you're at an undergrad level, you know there's very little evidence of those leadership skills. Okay, let's go. Ravi says, I've had 3 attempts. I'm going on the fourth one. How do you cope up with the repetitive revision reviews and how do you keep going? That's a great question, Ravi. And I'll say it's hard. Let me just start with this. But again, there are 2 or 3 things that I'd say. First of all, remind yourself why you're doing this. I mean, always, if you haven't written it down on a wall and in a diary, and in the more places you write it down, the more important that reason would be. Remember, it's not relevant as to whether you do it in a first attempt, although ideally you should, or whether you do it in the first attempt. That GMAT score still stays with you. Your MBA is still the same. B schools don't care. In fact, they see this as a really positive character trait if you've done it in 3 or 4 attempts, because they really say, hey, you truly want to study at a top B school. So one is remind yourself why you're doing this. That's first. Number two is make notes. When you make notes, revisions do become easier. Number three is tell yourself what you need to revise, and this is where strategic review of questions become really important. A lot of people really just say, hey, they solve an SC question, they say there's a modifier error. They solve a CR question, they say this is a careless mistake. After having gone through the modifier lessons 3 times, or studied modifiers for so long, you usually don't have a modifier error. You usually have a habit that leads you to not worry about that modifier. And it's the habit that you need to identify rather than the error that you need to identify. Once you identify the habit, fixing that habit becomes a lot easier. There was a time a few years back when I would do about five work with about 4 to 5 students for private tutoring, and I wouldn't do a whole lot of hours. I just don't have the time. I'd do 2 to 3 hours with them at the most throughout their entire GMAT journey. And my job was not to teach them anything, but to make them realize what habit is messing their scores up. And those people usually improve within 10 to 15 days. If they did improve, that is. There were people who just wouldn't try, but then those who did would improve within 10 to 15 days, because it's the habits that so after the stage one, and once you get to stage two and stage three, it's the habits that are important, and identifying why you're faltering. The why piece becomes way more important. Okay, so hopefully, Ravi, that answers your question. Okay, and then I want to just add one other thing to it, which is that, hey, get done with the GMAT, and you'd find things very useful. Admission consultants, okay, lots of good ones. So you have, if you look at the top-notch Indian admission consultant, you have Poonam from ISA Reviews. She's what I call it, the hidden gem. She's actually the top-rated admission consultant, Indian admission consultant on GMAT Club. So if you go to GMAT Club, you have a consultant directly. You're there. You also have. You know what? Write to me. It's just it's been some time since uh, you have August Academy. What's the name of the guy? I forgot. That's very good. Let me actually give you the names of folks. Karthik from August Academy. I'm sorry. Uh, was really good. Then I can, if you write to me at rajat@e-gmat, I can send you names about 5 to 6 admission consultants who we really recommend, Vartha. So yeah. And again, my email addresses. Master, MFE, Oxford, MFin, Princeton with 2+ years, Big Four audit experience. The goal is private equity, investment banking. Sorry. Private equity and investment banking firms, if you want to get campus placement, um, I would say I would go for bigger schools, just to be. I mean, in today's environment, that's what I would recommend if your background allows them to. But then, yes, they are your second best chances. Something like a said business school, or so. So that's something that's, I think, there. What can be the percentile expected to get into 1 year MBA program? Again, depends on which program, Pooja. I mean, if you're looking at European programs, then you're looking at 720 or so, which is what I think a 92nd, 93rd percentile right now. Okay. So if you're looking at other schools, lower ranked schools, so for example, Oxford or so said, 680 would be good enough. Any discounts on the current e-GMAT course? We do it based on who you are. So write to rajatari-gmat. So again, 1 year MBA. So if you're looking at ISB, then again, aim for that 720. I think that's there. In the Asian schools such as CUHK, I'm sorry, I'm not aware of those requirements. My apologies. I'm more aware of European and USP schools, to a certain degree, Indian B schools as well, but not as much with Asians, with the Asian B schools, such as uh, NUS or Nanyang and a couple of others. So yeah, I won't be the best person to advise you. If you're looking for which schools to aim for 1 year MBA in Europe, IESC, HEC, you know, are good ones. Cambridge is decent too. INSEAD, of course, top notch. Um, if you can get into IMD Switzerland, it's a very selective school. Then definitely I'd recommend that. It's a beautiful school. I'd love that. So those are top schools. Now, there are also lots of good schools in Germany, for example, that aren't top schools, but if you want to work in Germany, they offer really good careers. Germany recently made its immigration policies really, really friendly, so that's there as well. So that's where the University of Frankfurt comes in, and some of those others. They're really, I'd say, low cost MBAs, but again, don't expect salaries to be that high after these schools. But if you get a good GMAT score, you apply to these schools, you practically get an MBA for 10,000 euros or so, which is way cheaper than what you'd get one in India for. Okay. And you'd get I think, work permits. What would be good for Indian 1 year MBAs in the top schools? So, anything apart from the GMAT score. So, if you have a good GMAT score, so the executive programs at IMB, IMA, they're not super selective, I think. So if you have 9 years of experience, if you do reasonably well in with the application and interview, and you have a good GMAT score, you should get in. So that's something that's there. So it's a lot. I don't want to use the word easier, but once you have the GMAT, comparatively, it's a lot less competitive than the USB schools. Again, the executive programs, not the standard MBA that these schools have right after that you do right after your bachelor's. Okay. Would I still prefer to be open for USB schools? I love the US. I mean, I live in the US, So that's something that's there, and I mean, this US offers the best business education, or rather, best education in most areas. Let me just be very clear. So, why do you think you shouldn't go to US? Why do you think you shouldn't go to US? So, I mean, what's your concern about it? Uh, uh, yeah, open for both options. You should. I mean, no other place in the world has such good management education. The other thing which I really like is, and I'm a sucker for the 2 year MBA program, just because I think it allows you to make the right decisions. You do the very critical internship. You can do multiple internships in the US, in a 2 year MBA program, and essentially, you can make a reasonable amount of money there. How do you stay in touch with previous studies section after you've started another section? Notes, really important notes. I mean, that's where on the platform we ask you to make notes. We ask you to make your own notes. That's how you do it. And then revise your cementing quizzes every 2 or 3 days. That's if you do that, you'd find it's golden. Swati says, I'm working in Europe for the last 2 years. I'm looking for a good MBA from a top college as US. Uh, is US should be the only focus, or would you equally recommend? So again, the European INSEAD, IEFC, LBS, HEC, I rate them just as highly as I rate the USB schools. So that's there. But again, Europe has about 4 or 5 good options. IMD is a really great option, but then the tier one for me is going to be LBS, ISB, IMD, and INSEAD. Then tier 1.5 is where I'd put in IESC and ISADE. This is where you're talking about the equivalent of Yale, and then you have HEC, which is like for me the equivalent of, in many ways, slightly lower than Ross, but a Keenan Flagler is what HEC would put in, and then you have um, uh, 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 Oxford and Cambridge post that. So as long as you get into those. And Swati, where in Europe are you working? So yeah, setting in Europe, in the US, yes, in terms of the fact that there is, the US gives you that pretty much every MBA is STEM MBA, so you get 3 years and then you have an H1 visa that's there, but the green card process, the US still needs to figure that out. Let me just be very clear. But again, most people, even if they work there for about 4 to 5 years, they make so much more money than they do in Europe, just because the tax system is a lot more friendly here, the salaries are a lot higher, that they're still happy. Okay. And if you do the math, you do the net present value, you're going to find that US will still, despite the higher cost, come out a lot better. Pranay, is Europe a good option to go, considering the current economic status and jobs there? I think, I mean, in terms of, if you go to a good enough economy, absolutely, and a top school, not a tier two school, no. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I also need to step out, but it was a pleasure having you on board. And we have the algebra session tomorrow. Join us tomorrow, and we'll see you. Thank you, and have a great day.